Hello, and welcome to Aldsidu, where we discuss the old customs of the Germanic Saxons, the Germanic Scandinavian peoples, all the Germanic tribes. Aldsidu is an Old Saxon word that means old ways, and in this video I'm going to be discussing the Heathen Holidays and timekeeping of the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples. Now, my goal is to have this to be the most comprehensive video on YouTube on the Historical Pre-christian Heathen Holidays and timekeeping. It posts more sources than any other and proves its point so thoroughly there can be no doubt to its accuracy. I will give the dates of the holidays of the Germanic Scandinavian religion, called fornsiðr, Aldsidu, and fornsiðr, also other spellings, in the historical sources. So please feel free to pause this video to write the sources down if need be. These words for the religion mean old ways or old customs. Today, almost all eclectic Asatru Pagan groups or orgs claim that they follow the old ways, although almost all people in these groups have never read one page of an Edda or saga, nor have they done any serious research. This video is the culmination of over 20 years of research. Now, Scandinavian peoples are Germanic peoples. This map is not perfect. The Franks were further west. So there are a little bit more Germanic peoples than shown on this map, especially in this area. The Germanic peoples lived up here. So this map isn't perfect. Obviously, in the 1st century, Iceland wasn't inhabited yet and would be inhabited by Germanic Scandinavian peoples. Germanic Angles would go to Angleland or England, so the Germanic tribes did migrate a bit. But the point is the Germanic peoples venerated the Aesir and had holidays like Yule, Winter Nights, and Sigrblot that we're going to be discussing in this video. Scandinavians are Germanic peoples. Now, Proto-Indo-Europeans did have a lunar solar calendar. Before the advent of the modern solar calendar, which was brought to Europe by Julius Caesar, who gave us the Julian calendar. So it was Julius Caesar and the Romans who copied the solar calendar from the Egyptians. The Eurasian peoples all kept lunisolar calendars. So here's a source. There are many sources like almanacs that will state that. Now, what is a lunar solar calendar? A lunar solar calendar has 12 lunar moons. Our modern word month comes from the word moon, and it means cycle of the moon, although modern months are totally detached from the actual moon. But a lunar solar calendar has moons of the year, 12 of them, and the winter solstice is used to determine a leap year, where a 13th moon would be added to the year. So this was the way of timekeeping for the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples. We have Bede, an English monk, who wrote in the year 725 that when an embolism occurred, that is, a year of 13 lunar moons, they added the extra moon to the summer. So it's very clear from not just calendar rods and prime staffs that there were 12 or 13 moons a year, but we have literary evidence, too, that backs it up. Dr. Andreas Nordberg, the world's foremost scholar on Norse holidays, makes clear in his book on the dating of Yule that the pre-Christian Yule feast occurs at the first full moon after the first new moon following the winter solstice. The source is his book on the dating of Yule. You can get it for free on academia.edu. Just type it in, type Dr. Andreas Nordberg, and you will find it. There is a one-page English introduction on page 4, which is where I took this quote from. There's also a 20-page English summary of the Swedish book at the end of the book. And the summary is actually better than the 125 Swedish pages because it's a summary. It gets right to the point. Now, Scandinavian peoples were Germanic peoples. Those in the lands of modern Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, Belgium, and northwestern Poland, etc., all venerated the Aesir and followed lunisolar calendars. And even the Germanic and Scandinavian languages prove this. So, and there's the source. So, some Germanic peoples did move to England, as I mentioned before. Now, the Germanic and Scandinavian calendars were, as I said, lunar solar, the months corresponding to lunar cycles. The word month means cycle of the moon, as I said before. And even in modern English, which is descended from Old English, the word month means lunar cycle. If you add a th to the number 7, you get seventh. If you add a th to the number 6, you get sixth. The th at the end of these numbers mean that the numbers are now in an order or a succession. When a th is added to the word moon, you get the word month. So a lunar solar calendar is reflected in the Proto-Germanic term menos, or month, Old English monad, Old Saxon manud, Old Norse manuther, and Old High German monod. This being a derivation of the word for moon, meno, which shares its ancestry with the Greek mena for moon, men for month, and in Latin, the mensis, the word for month. And here's your source. The Roman historian Tacitus writes in his Germania, in chapter 11, which was written around 98 CE. Some people believe it was written as late as 117 CE. But nonetheless, the Roman historian Tacitus, who was a Roman pagan polytheist, he wrote that the Germanic peoples observed the lunar months. This is his quote in chapter 11 from his book Germania or Germania. The community gathers if nothing unusual or sudden happens at certain times when the moon is new or full, because they consider this the luckiest beginning to discuss matters. Also, they do not calculate the number of days, but the number of nights. In this way, they state purpose and commitment. Night does precede the day. I took this from Dr. Andreas Zautner's book, The Lunar Solar Calendar of the Germanic Peoples, where he quotes Tacitus. So, when does the Germanic Scandinavian day begin? The day began at sundown and ended at sundown. This practice is seen in our American English world and language today. Notice how holidays begin at night. Christmas Eve, for example. Notice names for the Germanic Heathen Holidays that we find in the sagas, the Eddas, and the historical sources. Winter nights, Old Norse, Vinternatten. Midwinter nights, Old Norse, Midvinternatten. And phrases like 3 nights of Yule. And for the Old Saxon heathens, let's take the word uuih, the word with, for a sacred grove. The Old Norse equivalent of that is ve, spelled V-E. The modern German word for Christmas is Weihnachten, which literally means sacred grove nights. Nachten is plural in German. So Weih comes from the Old Saxon uuih for sacred grove. And again, 2 U's or a double U was pronounced like a W. So Weihnachten is how they say it in Germany today, but this goes back to the Old Saxon word uuih for sacred grove. So I already mentioned the quote in Germania chapter 11, where Tacitus says night precedes the day. So that is when the day begins. And the day, the Germanic day, was split into 8 parts. We have midnight, and here's the Old Norse. So I'm going to say the 8 parts of the day with the Old Norse spellings. I'll point to them with my cursor. We have midnight, ut, morning, undern, midday, after midday, evening, and night. The source is Dr. Andreas E. Zautner, the Lunar Solar Calendar of the Germanic Peoples. But, to be blunt, the Poetic Edda, Voluspa, stanza 6, mentions 5 of these 8 parts of the day in just one verse alone. And let's read the verse. So the aldermen went to their seats, the most holy gods to hold council. To night and the waning moon they gave names, morning and midday, as well as undern and evening, to count the years. So Voluspa shows that the night and the moon were used to count the years. And honestly, all 8 of these parts of the day you can find in the Eddas and the sagas. So, I mean, in one verse alone, there's 5 of them here. So this is pretty straightforward, and this is accurate. Now, I'm listing a theory of mine, but there is a 9-year sacrifice. People are aware of it because the TV show Vikings, Season 1, Episode 8, has a description of the 9-year sacrifice. We have 3 historical sources for the 9-year sacrifice in the literary source. We also have 2 rune stones that prove that this 9-year sacrifice was every 8 years. So here's my theory. Notice that the 9-year sacrifice was really done every 8 years. Now that's fact. Sunday was called the 8th day, as I mentioned before, because the first and the last days are counted in the Roman method. So a 9-year sacrifice would mean every 8 years. So I personally, here's my theory, believe this has something to do with the sequence of 8. There's 8 parts of the day, and every 8 years we have a metatonic cycle going where the solar and lunar cycles match. So due to the sun and the moon becoming in alignment every 8 years, I believe that was the reason for the 8-year sacrifice and why they had 8 parts of a day. We also have, 3 stanzas of 8 in the Futhark, or the Futhark, the Futhark is English. Futhark is Germanic. Now that is a theory. It could be coincidence that there are 3 8s in the Elder Futhark. But I don't think that it is a coincidence that the 8-year sacrifice aligns with an 8-year, because every 8 years, 3 out of every 8 years has a 13th lunar moon, 5 do not, have just 12 lunar moons, and there are 8 parts of the day. I believe this is the basis of the 8-year sacrifice. So, and the 2 runestone, here are their names, the 2 runestones that prove that the 9-year sacrifice was every 8 years. You can see pictures of these 2 runestones in Dr. Zautner's book called The Lunar Solar Calendar of Germanic Peoples. That's around $30 on Amazon. I suggest buying it. There's not a Kindle version. My apologies. Now let's talk about the year. The Old Saxon word for year is pronounced year. It's spelled G-E-R. The modern German word does come from the Old Saxon year, and it's Yara is how you pronounce it in modern German. The Germanic year had 12 or 13 moons, as I've mentioned before, and we have many runic prime staff and calendar rods that have 12 lunar moons. See Dr. Nordberg's book. We also have the literary evidence. Einhard in 830 CE lists 12 moon names in the year in chapter 29 of Vita Caroli Magni. That means Life of Charles the Great, known as Charlemagne. We also have Bede, who stated in 725 CE in De Temporum Rationale, chapter 15, that the year had 2 seasons, winter and summer. Bede mentions 12 moon names as well. Bede also said that winter and summer had midpoints, and Bede, as I said, gives it 12 moon names. And if you remember my quote from Bede earlier, he says sometimes they had a 13th moon to the year. So the Icelandic calendar, known as the Misery calendar, while it was recorded in the 10th century and it was in post-Christian Iceland, it had 12 moons as well. You can look up the Misery calendar online. Bede and the prime staffs, again, show that the year was 12 and 13 moons, divided into 2 seasons with halfway points. Hence, we have phrases like midwinter in the Germanic texts. Now, the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples counted the years by winters. For example, we have the Old Saxon word winterjetalu, which means winter years. So, I've lived 50 winters at this point in my life, so I'm considered 50 years old. The year began with winter, as clearly shown in many saga passages. The most famous of this is Ynglinga Saga, chapter 8, where it says, Odin established the same law in this land that had been forest in Asaland, or the land of the Aesir. On winter day, there should be a bloat for a good year. In the middle of winter, a bloat for a good crop, and the third bloat should be on the first day of summer, known as summer day, a victory bloat. And by the way, not only is there the old Saxon word winter yatalo, meaning winter years, but we even have throughout all the writings of Snorri and the Eddas and sagas, whether Snorri wrote them or not, we have people listed their age by how many winters old they were. So here's a passage from Heimskringla's Ynglinga Saga, chapter 34. There a great bloat was held, and many kings came as it was midwinter. And one winter, when many folks were gathered in Uppsala, King Ingvar was there with his sons, who were 6 winters old. So, we all know about Marvel, and we all know that, many heathens today are a little more Marvel true than they are historical, so hence the picture. But contrary to popular opinion, the 7-day week originated in the Middle East and was brought into Europe with Christianity, and the Bible story of the world being created in 6 days, and Yahweh or Jehovah resting on the 7th day. The Romans did not keep a period of time called a week until the 2nd century. At first, the Romans adopted an 8-day week and later changed it to a 7-day week. And here's the source. And honestly, pretty much any almanac will give this as well. In the flood story of the Assyro-Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the storm lasts for 7 days. The dove is sent out after 7 days, and the Noah-like character of Utnapishtim leaves the ark 7 days after it reaches the ground. And here's the source. The Greeks and Romans in the 1st century, the Greeks and the Romans wrote the New Testament in the 1st century. And the New Testament and the Greek and Roman writings in the 1st century did not have a word for week. The New Testament and 1st and 2nd century Greek and Latin church texts counted days from the Sabbath. For example, Matthew 28:1, which recounts the resurrection of Jesus, literally states, after the Sabbath at dawn, one day after the Sabbath, Miriam came, Miriam Magdalene, and along with the other Miriam, Mary, to the tomb. So to be clear, the New Testament never says on the first day of the week, nor does the New Testament say on Sunday. The New Testament and the writings of the Church Fathers for the first 2 centuries of the Common Era always say one day from the Sabbath. This is consistent throughout the New Testament. There is not a word for week in the New Testament because at that time no such word existed in the European mind. See the Greek text of Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. By the way, I'm not jumping up and down about my past, but I do have a master's degree in divinity and archaeology. I studied archaeology in Israel for 2 years. Yes, Sas is a Germanic last name. I still have family living in Germany, and obviously my particular line came to America. So I was born in America. I am a Gentile, is what the Jews would call me, a goy. So I did have interest in my early life in Christianity. The ground and studying archaeology disproved the Bible to me, so I became an atheist before becoming a heathen. So while I don't have a PhD on the subject, but I do have 12 years of Hebrew study in my past. I have been a heathen for 21 years now, but I still had 12 years of solid study of Greek and Hebrew. So by the way, what you're looking at is the Greek of Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, the first sentence of the resurrection in the Bible. But the Greek is the same in Mark chapter 16, verse 1, Luke chapter 24, verse 1, and John chapter 20, verse 1, along with other passages like Acts chapter 20. Anytime you see in the Bible the phrase first day of the week, it is always following the Greek here, opsa de sabbaton, and eis mian sabbaton. Sabbaton here is a plural word, so after one of the Sabbaths, toward what the Christians here translate for is day 1 of the Sabbath. Really I can make a long video on this, but if you read, say, Leviticus chapter 23, Passover is a 7-day feast with the first and 7th day being a Sabbath. So the church thinks Jesus died on a Friday night, rose from the grave on Sunday morning because they're a bunch of morons that don't read the old and irrelevant Testament, which clearly states that there are multiple Sabbaths during the week of Passover. So if Jesus existed, I don't believe he rose from the dead on a Sunday Sabbath to begin with. There were 2 Sabbaths back to back, Seventh-day Sabbath, along with the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Passover, occurred back to back. So that's why after one of the Sabbaths at dawn, they went to the tomb. But that is Christianity for you. But for the purpose of this video, back to the point, the Greek texts do not have a word for week, because the Greek and the Greco-Roman world did not have a 7-day period of time yet. So even the early church fathers in the 2nd century were 100% consistent in counting days from the Sabbath, as there was no Roman or Greek word for week. Justin Martyr died in 165 AD. He wrote in his famous work, Dialogue with Trypho, that the first day after the Sabbath, remaining the first of all days, is called, however, the 8th day, according to the number of all days of the cycle, and yet it remains the first day. So I can't stress enough, this is a clear pattern in the 1st and century Greek and Roman writings. The Roman world first adopted an 8-day week. Okay, and in the 1st century they didn't have this yet. They didn't have an 8-day period of time. And when people say, now wait a minute, lunar calendar is 28 days. No, it's not. The average moon length in the lunar calendar is 29 and a half days. And almost all moons are 29 or 30 days. Rarely it does happen that a moon can last for 28 days. But more often than not, they're 29 and 30 days. And they average 29 and a half days. And Dr. Andreas Zautner says in his Lunar Solar Calendar of the Germanic Peoples book on page 41 that the weekly calendar of 52 weeks derives from the solar calendar. That is true. Peoples following solar ideals were more apt to follow a 7-day week. Now here's where lots of people get pissed off and say, well, of course Germanic heathens had a 7-day week because names of the days of the week are named after Germanic gods. I tell you that that is wrong. That while in modern English, Tuesday is named after Tur or Tu, and Wednesday is Woden's Day or Odin's Day, Thursday is Thor's Day or Thunar's Day, Friday is named for Frigga, the wife of Odin, not Freya, but Frigga, the Frigge. But all things start with Rome. The Romans started to give the names of the days of the week based on the sun, moon, and planet names. The planets were named after Greco-Roman gods. So when the Germanic peoples were introduced to Christianity, they took the practice of naming the planets and the days after the local gods. So, for example, in Christian England, Mars and Aries Day was equated with Tu, Norse Tyr, really pronounced Tur. And Mercury, the 4th day of the week, was equated with Woden or Odin. Jupiter or Zeus, the 5th day of the week, was the Germanic cognate to Thor. The same with the 6th day of Venus being equated with Freya, wife of Odin. So, to be blunt, contrary to popular opinion, the names Thor's days, Frigga's day, Woden's day, Tuesday do not prove that Germanic peoples and Scandinavian peoples kept a 7-day week. These names were adopted after Christianization and in Christian England first. Here is the source from Oxford University. But let me give a full history. First, the Roman world started to adopt Christian ideas, and the more it became Christian, well, the more timekeeping became a 7-day week. The days of the week were named for the classical planets in Latin first. This naming system persisted alongside an ecclesiastical tradition of numbering the days in ecclesiastical Latin, beginning with Dominica, the Lord's Day, as the first day. The Greco-Roman gods associated with the classical planets were rendered in their Interpretatio Germanica at some point during the late Roman Empire, yielding the Germanic tradition of names being based on indigenous deities. So, do note that Sunday is named after the sun, Monday is named after the moon, And Saturday was named after Saturn. So, again, contrary to popular opinion and shown clearly in the Eddas, sagas, and the poems in Old Saxon and Old English, the Germanic peoples had days of the moon waning and waxing. So here's a passage from a poem in the Poetic Edda where we see waxing and waning of the moon. We also see it stated that the moon and the sun were created to tell time for men. So let's read this passage. Odin spoke. Next, answer me well if your wisdom avails, and you know well, Vafthrûdnir, now, whence came the moon over the world of men, that fares in the flaming sun? Vafthrûdnir spoke, Mundilferi is he who created the moon and fathered the flaming sun. The round of the sky each day they run to tell the time for men. So here's a passage which is a little different from our other poetic passage that I read earlier, that the moon tells the time and the years. This passage is saying it's both the moon and the sun. But remember, this doesn't contradict anything because a lunar solar uses both the sun and the moon to tell time. Continuing, Odin spoke, answer me well, if you are wise, if you knowest. Vafthrûdnir now, when comes the day over mankind that fares, or night with the waning moon? Vafthrûdnir spoke, the father of day is Delling called, and the night was begotten by Nor. Full moon and new moon by the gods were fashioned to tell the time for men. So this is pretty clear that the sun and the moon were both fashioned to tell time for men. Modern eclectic pagans and Asatru uses the sun and only the sun to determine when the holy days are, but Germanic heathens looked at both the sun and the moon to tell time for men. And this is very clear in the sagas themselves and the Eddas themselves. We also see in the Old Saxon Hellenic, written around 400 years earlier than the Eddas and the sagas, that the Saxons, the old heathen Saxons in Saxony, had days of the moon waning and waxing. So here's my translation of the Old Saxon Helion, written around 830. It says, also, this is why the brilliant hill fort is called Jericho. Now, Jericho is a Hebrew word that means moon, Jericho. And here in Judea it stands, it is made with walls. It is named after the moon, after the radiant constellation. It is not able to avoid time. Each day, the moon does as it does, waning or growing. So it is done in this world here, in this middle yard. Some people translate that middle earth. Mankind as a child goes and follows. The old die, but equally the young then come, growing old, until word also takes away. So word, the Old Norse equivalent is Urther. So this is the Nornir. The three spinners, so to speak. So in this passage, we see clearly the Saxon understanding of fate and time shown. The word Jericho in biblical Hebrew means moon, and since the moon is the main celestial body that shows time in the Saxons, the author expounds on the Saxon understanding of time and how all is subject to word. Please also notice that the Saxons did not have days of the week, which came from the Hebrews to the Romans to the heathens. Of course, it really went as well from the Hebrews to the Egyptians to the Romans to the heathens. They had days of the moon, which waned and grew, and this is how the Saxons understood time. So, contrary to popular opinion, and wicked true, marvel true, the Wiccan Wheel of the Year was not the historical calendar in Germanic peoples. The Wiccan faith, so to speak, and I don't mean to knock the Wiccan faith. It's a fine and amazing tradition, but it is not the basis for historical pre-Christian heathen Germanic heathenry. Dr. Andreas Zautner says very clearly, if we browse the internet for holy days of the Germanic people, we mainly find passages presenting an octopartite year, the so-called eight-spoked wheel of the year based on the solstices, the equinoxes, and the 4 moon feasts in between. This year circle has absolutely no historical basis, although it is very popular in neo-pagan circles, especially within Wicca and eclectic Asatru. There's no verified evidence for such a year circle as basis for this seasonal festivities. The same is true for the Celtic feasts within the year circle, because the Gauls, too, used a lunar solar calendar, as we know from the examples of the Calendar calendar, which is a steel calendar from the 2nd century found on the ground. Remember, the Roman Gauls, they were Celts. So the Celtic people used a lunar solar calendar as well. However, they were different from the Germanic peoples, because the Germanic peoples, a new moon was the beginning of a moon, but to the Celts it was full moon to full moon. So Dr. Zoutner continues, he says, if one has internalized the eight-spoke wheel of the year, popular in Asatru and Wicca, if one has internalized these ideas, one should get rid of them immediately. So the scholars, the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Germanic, these scholars, they look at a lot of Asatru as LARPists that, browse the internet for holidays and don't really know what the Eddas and the sagas state. So they see them as LARPers and not, real heathens. Hence they see them as a new religion. And I'm not knocking New Age heathenry, but I'm just telling you, it's quotes like this that tell you exactly what the scholars think. And at times, Dr. Jackson Crawford in his videos doesn't give the most colorful opinions on modern paganism either. So scholars do have their opinion. But speaking of Marvel truths, Wicca true, and Lego truths, when were the holidays of the Germanic peoples then? The pre-Christian heathen people in Germanic Scandinavian lands celebrated 3 bloats a year, each lasting 3 days. The beginning of winter, midwinter, and the beginning of summer were the 3 major bloats a year. These are called winter nights, midwinter nights, and sigur. And as an FYI, Yule is another name for midwinter nights, and Marbloat is another name for sigur. I've also seen summer bloat or Sumarbloat as another name. It's in Dr. Zoutner's book on page 120. Now let's get rid of Lego true and bring in the cult of historical Odin. So what do the sagas state? We have many passages in the sagas. Odin established the same law in his land that had been in force in Asaland, the land of the Aesir. On winter day, which is the first day of winter, there should be a bloat for a good year. In the middle of winter, a bloat for a good crop. And the third bloat should be on summer day, a victory bloat. See Ynglinga Saga, chapter 8. Then check out Heimskringla Ola Saga Helga, the slaying of Alvir of Ega. Now it is their old ways, or their fornsiðr, to hold a bloat in Haust, as in harvest moon, that's what Haust means. Haust manuther, a moon. So they're going to hold a bloat in Haust to welcome the year, a second in the middle of winter, and a third to welcome summer. Olaf, the Saga of St. Olaf, chapter 117. As long as heathendom lasted, he was wont to hold 3 blood offerings, one on winter nights, a second at midwinter, and a third at the start of summer. But when he became a Christian, he kept up in the same way with the feast. In the autumn, he held a feast of friends, then in the winter, a Yule feast, and then he bade many men to come to him again. And the third, he held a Pascha. Pascha means Passover. The Last Supper is a Christian Passover. It became Easter in England and Germany and America, but the rest of the world mainly calls it Pascha or Passover. So, and Dr. Zoutner says in his book, midsummer festivities had no connection with the Odin cult. So, 3 bloats a year, midsummer is just a time marker. And remember, 3 out of every 8 years, there is no exact midsummer because there's a 7th moon in the summer. The summer is a very busy time for the farming communities and the trading and raiding communities. They're busy. It's not a time to bloat for them. Things certainly were held during the summer. The Icelanders even preferred to hold their things in July, around the time of the midsummer marker. So let's discuss the 3 major holy days. So winter nights, which begins the year. And remember, in our last quote, I can go back to it for a second. On winter day, there's a bloat for a good year. So the year begins with winter as we count the ages of people, how many winters we've lived. Um, the year begins with winter. So Dr. Andreas E. Zautner says, as previously mentioned, the Germanic tribes started the year with the beginning of winter, i.e. the winter nights. And remember, the holy days were celebrated at night. And this kind of continues with Weihnachten, the sacred grove nights that I mentioned earlier. And Christmas Eve is a night. That's why it was a big deal to trim the tree on Christmas Eve, though now I guess we trim the tree several weeks before Halloween in our modern world, if you even have a Christmas tree, because I don't personally, but I don't knock people that do a secularized Christmas tree and do a secular Christmas with their family. I certainly do a secular Christmas with my family. So please note that winter nights begin in the full moon of the 10th moon of the year, called house maneuver. So remember, one of the quotes on the other page, it used the word autumn, but that word doesn't really exist in the sagas. The word house often gets translated as autumn. House means harvest. House bloat is another name for winter nights. So Giza Saga, Sir Sonar, chapter 9, Thorgrim meant to have a house bloat on winter nights and to bloat the fray. I love this passage because we have the terms veternatum for winter nights in it. We have the word house bloat in it. I do not know why many people cannot connect house maneuver, the moon name, with the house bloat. I mean, there's a Yule bloat during Yule maneuver, the moon of Yule. So why would winter nights not also be called a house bloat? I don't understand why people do not connect it. To me, that's very simple. Now, Bede stated in 725 AD in his work De Temporum Rationae, chapter 15, he stated clearly the moon by which they began their winter season was called winter filleth, a name compounded for the terms winter and full moon, because from the full moon of that moon, winter was thought to begin. Remember, in Old English and even Old Norse, a lot of the Y's are pronounced like U, hence I pronounce T-Y-R, the god. Many people say Tyr, but it's really a U sound. That's winter fulleth, meaning winter in full moon. Now, this is clear evidence that winter nights began in a full moon. And in my opinion, this is a smoking gun, because if winter starts on a full moon, then midwinter must be on a full moon, and summer must begin on a full moon. This also agrees with the Tacitus quote that I mentioned earlier, that Germanic peoples met on new and full moons. So if winter begins with winter nights, a full moon, then the midpoint of winter would also be a full moon, as well as the ending point. So to put it more simply, the full moon of the 10th moon of the year would be winter nights. 3 full moons later would be Yule, and 3 full moons after Yule would be Sigrblot, the start of summer. Now, please also note, in a year of 13 moons, that winter nights would be the 11th moon of the year. So, again, the solstice, you would determine when there would be a leap year. So here's another great passage from the saga Olaf Haraldsson and Heimskringla. The king received news from Trondheim about farmers holding bloats on winter nights with great wassails. It was reported to the king that love cups were blessed, honoring the Aesir according to the old pagan religion, fyrn, sidu. Also, cattle and horses were slaughtered on altars sprinkled with their blood. The bloats were accompanied with prayers for a bountiful harvest. Again, you're going to do prayers for a harvest because it's a housed bloat, house meaning harvest. It is also reported the gods were irate due to people from Halagoland. They were converting to Christianity. So let's go to Giza Saga Surnar, chapter 6, the last sentence of chapter 6, beginning of chapter 7. And now the summer slips away, and the first winter night was at hand. So the first winter night, singular. This implies that their winter nights is many nights, as in 3 nights. Gisli made a symbol and bade his friends to it that he wished to have a gathering and to welcome both the winter and his friends. So, I mean, this is very clear that there's more than one winter night. It's called winter nights. And I even found a passage, I should have included it, that there's a third winter night. So we know that there are 3 winter nights. We also know because Yule is 3 nights, which I'll get to shortly. The sagas just come out and spell that out. So does the Poetic Edda. There's many passages, well, several, that state Yule was 3 days historically. So now in Iceland and Norway, winter nights was also accompanied with a Dísablót. I'm not sure if that really happened in Norway, in Denmark and Sweden, but certainly in Iceland and probably in Norway. Dísablót is mentioned with winter nights, like Viga Gloomsaga chapter 6, which is an Icelandic saga. At the start of winter, a symbol was prepared in a Dísablót in which observants all were expected to take part, but Gloom sat in his place and did not attend it. So notice, I did mention earlier, we have passages about Uppsala that, they're obligatory, that everyone needs to go. Here's a passage that during winter nights, all were expected to take part. So the idea that everyone did holidays whenever they wanted to is BS, to be blunt. It's bullshit. Why? Because if all are expected to be in observance, then there has to be an agreed upon time. So to say that one village celebrated Yule at a different time than another Yule village would is kind of crazy, especially in Sweden when you have everyone who's supposed to go to Uppsala to do it. It means all of Sweden was doing it at the same time. So let's discuss now the 3 nights of Yule and midwinter. So here's a passage, the saga Magnus the Blind, chapter 6. On the eve of Yule, King Harald came to Björgen and brought his ships to Florövagar. He would not fight during Yule because of its holiness, but King Magnus got ready for him in the town. He had a sling raised out on Holm, and he had his chains made of iron and partly of tree stocks. He had laid these across the Vag from the king's residence. He had foot traps forged and cast over Jonsvolds, and Yule was kept holy for only 3 days when no work was done. So, obviously, Yule was too holy to even have a duel and fight. And of course, the most famous saga, the sad story of the first king of all Norway, Harald Fairhair, who was a heathen, one of his successors, because his first son succeeded him at his death and he was heathen. But when he died, the next son took over, and that was King Håkon the Good, who was a Christian who spent his youth being educated in England by bishops and monks. So King Håkon came back. So this is why it says King Håkon was a good Christian when he came to Norway, but the whole country was heathen. Good. With much heathen bloat, and as many great people, as well as the favor of the common people, were to be conciliated, he resolved to practice his Christianity in private. So what does that mean? It means, well, he came and he wanted to push Christianity, but the common people wanted none of it. So at first he kept the Sundays and the Friday fasts and some token of the greatest holy days. But he did make a law that the feast of Yule should begin at the same time the Christian people held it, and that every man under penalty should brew a meal of malt into ale, and therewith keep Yule holy as long as it lasted. Before Håkon the Good, the first night of Yule was Håkonot, that is, midwinter night, and Yule was held for 3 nights. So you can't argue this, that pre-Christian heathen Yule was on a different night than the solstice, because at this time, the Julian calendar solstice was December 25th, and that's when Christians were doing their Christ Mass. And they started calling Christ Mass Yule with Håkon the Good. Why? Because it was a part to blot out heathen Yule, and it worked. The people wanted none of it, but when he combined the two holidays, he just moved one time to another. It was the beginning of the downfall of heathen Yule in Scandinavia, because this practice spread to Sweden and Denmark. And it was the beginning of the rise of the Christian Yule on the solstice. So what does Håkonot mean? Dr. Zoutner believed the term means chop night, but that is debated. But it certainly means something night, because the NOTT does absolutely mean night. I agree with Dr. Zoutner that Yule was the night for bloat. So it was a night where the animals would be cut up and the blood was offered to the gods. So since Yule was originally on Hokanot and it was moved to be at the same time as the Christ Mass, it is clear Yule was not historically on the solstice. Even Thietmar of Merseburg, who celebrated the birth of Jesus on the Greek Orthodox Christ Mass on January 6th. Thietmar of Merseburg says Yule was even after January 6th. According to Thietmar, Yule was celebrated in January after Epiphany, the Greek Orthodox Christ Mass, and that every 8 years Yule was accompanied with an 8-year sacrifice. Here's the passage from the Chronicon of Thietmar of Merseburg. It was actually written around 1000 AD, but it was referring to about the time of 925 AD, or CE, excuse me. As I have heard odd stories concerning their ancient midwinter bloats, I will not allow this custom, this sidu, to be ignored. The middle of that kingdom is called Letteren or Lera. In the region of Steinsland, all the people gathered every 9 years in January. That is after we, Greek Orthodox people, have celebrated the birth of our Lord, as in the Lord Jesus Christ. And there these heathens offered to their gods bloats. As I mentioned earlier, we have 2 runestones proving the 9-year bloat was every 8 years, the runestone of Blekinge and the runestone of Steinsland. Rune Rasmussen has told me he doesn't buy the runestone of Blekinge, so I might check that one out. But Dr. Zoutner believes that it does, but no one's questioning the second runestone that clearly does mention an 8-year sacrifice. Now, Dr. Andreas Nordberg, the world's foremost scholar in Norse holy days, makes it clear in his book on the dating of Yule that the pre-Christian Yule feast occurs at the first full moon after the first new moon following the winter solstice. I already mentioned you can buy this, or you can get this book for free in PDF form on academia.edu. And Dr. Zoutner in his book states the same thing, though I'm going to have to explain his quote. It is a common misinterpretation to think that Yule happened on the winter solstice. According to the prime staff, the midwinter feast was celebrated in the so-called Hokanot, so Hokanot is also on prime staff, on January 12th. Thus, it has been a fixed calendar date in the middle of the Julian month. Applying a lunar calendar, this is the full moon date, also in accordance with the Yule moon and disting rules, this time in the first lunar moon of the year after the solstice. So what is Zoutner talking about January 12th? Well, I mentioned before the mystery calendar. So in Iceland, the Iceland All thing, when it was Christian, said, screw this, we want to keep our heritage to a point. We want to have the moon names follow our historical heathen names, but since we're Christians now, we're going to blow up the moon. We're going to have 12 fixed day moons, and we're going to make our Yule on January 12th. Now, of course, later they would celebrate Yule as Christmas at the same time as the Christians. But the mystery calendar, of course, which was the first step of the Icelanders to get away from their Lunar solar calendar, they originally placed Hokanot on the fixed date of January 12th. So you can pause this. I'm not going to read all 4 of these. You can pause this and read it. But these are just many saga passages discussing Yule. There's a lot. I mean, I counted 103 passages of Yule mentioned in Heimskringla alone. I counted 33 passages alone in the saga St. Orlov. In that saga in particular, you need to make sure because, St. Orlov is a Christian, so you gotta read the context to figure out if it's a heathen Yule or if it's a Christian Christ Mass Yule. But I think you get my drift. Now, the third and final bloat of the year is sigur bloat, also called bar bloat or summer bloat. I've already read the Ynglinga saga passage, but I'll read it again. Odin established the same law that had been enforced amongst the Aesir in Aesir land. On the first day of winter, there should be a bloat for a good year, in the middle of winter for a good crop, and the third bloat should be on summer day, victory bloat. And remember, sigur bloat means victory bloat, so that's where the term comes from. I actually have a little typo here. This is Heimskringla Haraldsson saga, chapter 76. That's what this passage is from. I apologize for the typo. In Sweden, there was an age-old custom while they were still heathen that there should be a blot in Uppsala during Goa, which is a moon. So the word moon actually does not occur in the text there. But if I said Christmas happens in December, everyone would know that that is a month. I don't have to tell people that December is a month. Unfortunately, I have to tell people that Goa is a moon, so I added the word moon. So back to the beginning, in Sweden there was an age-old custom of fornsiðr and Aldsidu, while they were still heathen, that there would be a blot in Uppsala during Goa. Then they would blot for peace and victory for their king, and people from all over Sweden would come there. Now some people argue this passage has to do with disting, but that's due to the Icelandic mystery calendar that, there were originally 2 Yule moons. I didn't mention this earlier. And actually one of the Yule moons was axed. So the other moons kind of moved forward one spot, and then they dropped a moon called Second Moon, which became detached from the first moon. I know it's weird. I have actually already done a video on the mystery calendar, so check that out. But there is the Swedish lunar moon. In Sweden it was spelled G-O-J-E, but in Icelandic it's Goa. Really, Germanic peoples used runes. These letters that you see on my screen, while it's modern English, it's really the Latin alphabet. The Latin letters replaced the Germanic runes, and today we use Latin letters to write English instead of runes, which in my opinion kind of sucks. But I just wanted to point out, in addition to this, the Indiculus Superstitionum et Paganiarum. It's a list in the early 8th century of heathen behaviors outlawed in Germania. This lists victory bloat, which is sigur bloat. So that means we have a reference to sigur bloat in continental Germania 500 years before the Eddas were written by Snorri and the sagas. Well, the younger Edda was written by Snorri, the Codex Regius was not. Snorri wrote a lot of sagas, but not all the sagas are written by Snorri. So I certainly believe the old Saxons kept winter nights, Yule and sigur bloat. Why else? Because, the Indiculus, this document right here, the Indiculus, 2 documents or 2 different passages were put on one manuscript. There was a baptismal vowing that the old Saxons to renounce their 3 gods, Lunar, Woden, and Sasno. And we also have in that same manuscript, in the same parchment, the Indiculus, that outlaws 30 heathen behaviors, one of which is the victory moon. It's actually called victory moon, not victory bloat. But I still believe, as Dr. Scott T. Shell and others, that this is referring to a victory bloat. But no ifs, ands, or buts. We've got some testimony of this that's even relatively old. Now I dedicate the blog article that I wrote. I have a blog on this. If you want to read it, please check it out. But I dedicate this video and 2 decades of research to my father. So if any of you have had symbol with me, I'd like to say I am Robert Sass, son of Gerald Albert Sass, son of Albert Friedrich August Sass, son of Friedrich Heinrich Wilhelm Sass, son of Johann Jacob Sass, son of Johann Jacob Sass. I will boast and symbol and hail the old Saxon gods and the deeds of my ancestors. The surname Sass is the old Saxon word meaning Saxon. On the left is the most ancient clan coat of arms. So it is a silver shield with a red stripe and black insignia. When surnames were born in the early Middle Ages, the clan of the Saxons that gave us Sass as our surname lived in the area of Old Saxon called Westphalia. My grandma and grandpa, when they moved to America, were living in Westphalia. My grandma's entire family of 4 people, because so few survived the Great War, came to America. My grandpa was the only person in his family who joined my grandma's family because he wanted to marry my grandma, so he came to America. My entire grandpa's family remained in Westphalia, where a lot of them still live today. That is, if they survived the bombings of the Second World War. A number of them were killed in October of 1943 in what is known as the Black Day, when Hanover was leveled by British bombers. My grandma was one killed, and I visited her grave in the war section of the graveyard. It's a national grave. But I'm very proud that my history comes from Westphalia, Old Saxony. And the greatest heathen resistance to forced Christianization came from Wittikind, who was a Westphalian Saxon hero. I'm not saying I descend from Wittikind. I certainly don't know. But Sas was actually a name of commoners. The noble Westphalians had the last name Westfall. So I'm sure there are other Old Saxon surnames. There's a few, but the Sas family was not noble, so odds are kind of high I'm not descended from Wittikind. Who knows? But I certainly, my clan does come from the area of greatest heathen resistance to forced Christianization. But I'm rambling now. So please visit our website at www.aldsidu.com. Visit our blog at aldsidu.com/blog. Come see us on Facebook. Network with us. Like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.